All right. So you sent this paper in, and it's about narcissists and ostracism.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I mean, some of the results were really pretty surprising. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot more to this than I think meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. It's really fascinating stuff.
So,
The researchers in this paper, they really they
yeah.
didn't just dip their toes in the water. They like dove headfirst.
Yeah.
They did 7 separate studies
Wow.
using all sorts of methods,
Okay.
from surveys to smartphone tracking to even video analysis.
Wow. So, okay, what's the headline here? Like, do narcissists actually get ostracized more than other people?
It seems like the answer is yes,
Okay.
but it's complicated.
Okay.
The first study used a large national survey in Germany,
Okay.
and they found that folks who scored higher in narcissism
Yeah.
also reported experiencing more ostracism.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The type of narcissism mattered.
Okay, so we're talking about the different ways
That
it
narcissism.
can kind of show up.
Exactly. There's what we call the rivalry facet of narcissism,
Yeah.
which is all about putting others down to get ahead.
Right.
Think of
Yeah.
those hyper-competitive, always-have-to-win types.
Okay.
And then there's the admiration facet, which
Yeah.
is more about
Yeah.
using charm and charisma to
Right.
get what they want.
So, like, you've got your cutthroat narcissists, and then you've got your, like, charming narcissists.
Exactly.
And so this study found that the cutthroat ones were more likely to be ostracized?
Yeah, the rivalry facet had a much stronger link
Okay.
to ostracism
Interesting.
than the admiration facet.
Okay.
It seems like being a jerk is a surefire way to get excluded.
Yeah, that makes sense, but I'm wondering if it's always that clear-cut
Right.
in real life.
Yeah.
You know, like, sometimes those charming narcissists, they can be pretty manipulative, too.
That's a great point, and that's actually what they looked at in the second study.
Okay.
So instead of relying on surveys,
Yeah.
they tracked people's everyday experiences of ostracism
Uh-huh.
using the smartphone app.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So for 2 weeks, participants logged each time
Wow.
they felt excluded,
Okay.
giving us a real-time glimpse
Okay.
to their social interactions.
So they're, like, walking around with, like, a little ostracism detector
pretty much.
in their pocket.
Yeah.
What did they find?
Well, overall, people who scored higher in narcissism did report
Okay.
more instances of ostracism.
Okay.
And here's the surprising twist.
Okay.
In this real-world setting,
Yeah.
both the admiration and rivalry facets
Oh, really?
were linked to being ostracized.
Huh.
So even those charming narcissists were experiencing more exclusion
Wow.
than those low in narcissism.
So maybe charm only gets you so far.
Right.
Maybe there's something else about the way
Yeah.
that narcissists interact with people
Yeah.
that makes them more likely to be excluded.
That's one of the key takeaways here.
Okay.
Researchers suggest that narcissists might be more sensitive
Yeah.
to rejection
Okay.
and even overestimate
Okay.
how much they're being excluded.
So it's not necessarily that they're objectively ostracized more.
Yeah.
It's that they feel it more.
Exactly.
Okay.
To dig deeper into this,
Yeah.
the researchers used a classic psychology experiment
Mm-hmm.
called the cyberball game.
Okay, I've vaguely heard of that.
Have you ever heard of it?
It's that game where you're tossing a ball around,
Ha.
and then, like, sometimes they just stop tossing it to you.
You got it.
All right.
It's a clever way to study ostracism
Okay.
in a controlled setting.
Okay.
In 3 separate experiments,
Yeah.
participants played cyberball,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they were intentionally excluded from the game,
Yeah.
either partially or completely.
Okay.
The key here was to see how much participants perceived
Okay.
they were being excluded.
So in studies 3A, 3B, and 3C,
Yeah.
were the narcissists more likely to feel left out?
Here's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
In this very clear-cut scenario,
Yeah.
narcissists actually didn't show a heightened sensitivity
Oh, wow.
to exclusion.
Okay.
They reacted pretty much the same as everyone else.
That's surprising because I thought they were supposed to be, like,
No.
super sensitive to rejection.
Right. That's what makes this finding so fascinating.
Okay.
It suggests that while narcissists might feel ostracized
Yeah.
more often in their daily lives,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily because they're overreacting to every little slight.
So context matters when
Yeah.
it's, like, a blatant case of exclusion. Like in cyberball, they don't seem to take it any harder
Right.
than anybody else.
Yeah.
But in the real world,
Yeah.
like all the messy, unpredictable
Yeah.
stuff of life.
It seems like ambiguity plays a big role
Yeah.
in how narcissists experience social interactions.
Which brings us to study 4, where
Look.
things get even more nuanced.
This study looked at how people interpret ambiguous social situations.
Okay.
They had participants read short vignettes describing situations
Yeah.
that could be interpreted as exclusionary.
Right.
You know those moments where you're not sure
Uh-huh.
if someone's intentionally leaving you out
Yeah, yeah.
or if it's all in your head.
Like if you don't get invited to a party and
Exactly.
you're like, well, did they just forget about me? Or like, am I just overthinking it?
Exactly. And what they found is that people who scored highly narcissism
Yeah.
were more likely to see exclusion.
Oh, so even when it's not crystal clear,
It seems that way.
they're more likely to just assume the worst.
They tend to personalize ambiguous behavior,
Okay.
seeing it as directed at them,
Yeah.
even if it's not.
Okay, so we've seen that narcissists report more ostracism.
Right.
And they seem to perceive it more in ambiguous situations.
Yeah.
But are people actually more likely to exclude them in the first place?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's what they wanted to find out in Study 5.
Okay.
They flipped the script
Okay.
and asked, are people more likely to exclude someone if they think that person is a narcissist?
Okay. How did they test that? Yeah, how did they test that?
They presented participants with descriptions of potential partners
Okay.
for a task.
Uh-huh.
Some partners were described as high in admiration,
Yeah.
some high in rivalry,
Okay.
and some were average.
Got it.
Then they asked participants,
Yep.
who would you least like to work with?
So did people avoid the narcissists?
The results were pretty clear.
Okay.
People were significantly more likely to exclude
Okay.
those described as high in rivalry.
Okay, so if you come across as a cutthroat competitor,
Yeah.
people are less likely to want to work with you.
Exactly.
What about the charming narcissists?
Interestingly, being high in admiration
Yeah.
didn't significantly increase or decrease the
Okay.
likelihood of being excluded.
So maybe being charming won't win you any favors, but at least it doesn't make you a target.
Exactly.
Interesting.
But here's where it gets even more fascinating.
Okay.
Study 6 took this a step further
Okay.
by using videos.
Okay.
They had participants watch short clips
Yeah.
of people introducing themselves.
Uh-huh.
Some of these individuals were pre-screened
Okay.
as high in narcissism.
So they're trying to see if people could spot a narcissist
That was the idea.
from like a quick video.
And what's amazing is that people
Yeah.
reported stronger intentions to ostracize
Wow.
the high narcissism targets,
Yeah.
especially those showing the rivalry facet,
Yeah.
even though the videos were only 30 to 60 seconds long.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
You can make a bad impression that quickly.
It really highlights how quickly we form judgments about others
Yeah.
and how those judgments can influence our social behavior.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got narcissists who experience more ostracism.
Yeah.
They perceive it more readily,
Yeah.
and they are, in fact, more likely to be excluded by others.
Yeah.
Especially if they're displaying those rivalry traits.
Right.
But this last study
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
takes it to a whole other level.
This was a massive longitudinal study in New Zealand,
Okay.
and they followed participants for 14 years.
Wow.
Talk about a long-term commitment.
Yeah.
They wanted to see how ostracism and narcissism
Yeah.
related over time.
Yeah.
And what they found is pretty shocking.
Okay.
Feeling like an outsider might actually increase.
Wait, so you're saying that being excluded might actually make someone more narcissistic?
It is a surprising finding.
Yeah.
It suggests that the relationship between narcissism and ostracism
Yeah.
might be a vicious cycle.
So it's not just that narcissists are more likely to be ostracized.
Right.
It's that being ostracized might actually contribute to the problem.
That's a key insight here.
Wow.
We need to break this cycle.
Yeah.
But how are? Well, that's what we'll explore in the next part of our
Okay.
deep dive.
Stay tuned.
I'm hooked. Welcome back for a deep dive into this fascinating world of narcissism and ostracism.
Yeah.
So in the last part, we really dug into that research,
Yeah.
uncovered some surprising findings.
Yeah, some real surprises.
It's not just that narcissists like rub people the wrong way and get excluded.
Right.
It seems like there's a deeper, more complex thing going on here.
Absolutely. We talked about how narcissists might be more sensitive to rejection,
Yeah.
more likely to perceive exclusion,
Right.
even in ambiguous situations,
Right.
and how that feeling of being an outsider
Mhm.
might actually reinforce narcissistic tendencies over time.
Yeah, it's like a real social catch-22. It is.
But I'm wondering, like, so why should we even care about this link
Right.
between narcissism and ostracism?
Yeah.
How does it actually play out,
Right.
like in the real world?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important implications is that it can help us develop more empathy
Uh-huh.
for people who exhibit narcissistic traits.
Okay.
It doesn't excuse their behavior,
Right.
but it does offer a new perspective.
Yeah.
They might be acting out,
Yeah.
not just because they're self-centered,
Yeah.
but because they're deeply insecure
Right.
and afraid of rejection.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like they're constantly on guard, expecting to be excluded.
Yeah.
So they put up all these walls and defenses
Right.
to protect themselves.
And when you understand that,
Yeah.
you can start to see their behavior in a new light.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you have to put up with bad behavior,
Right.
but it can help you respond
Right.
in a way that's more compassionate
Yeah.
and less likely to escalate the situation.
Right. So knowledge is power.
Right.
But beyond just like having empathy, are there practical applications for this research?
Absolutely.
Could it help us actually like
Yeah.
navigate those tricky situations where we're dealing with someone who
Right.
might be high in narcissism?
Think about workplaces, for example.
Okay.
We know that people high in rivalry,
Yeah.
that cutthroat type of narcissism,
Yeah.
are more likely to be ostracized by their colleagues.
Right.
This insight can inform how we manage teams
Okay.
and resolve conflicts.
Okay.
Maybe we need to be more proactive in addressing those dynamics,
Okay.
perhaps through team-building exercises or conflict resolution training.
So instead of just labeling someone as difficult or a narcissist,
Right.
we can use this research
Right.
to understand the underlying dynamic
Exactly.
and find more effective ways to address it.
Exactly. And this applies to other settings as well,
Yeah.
like schools, families, even online communities.
Yeah.
Understanding the connection between narcissism and ostracism
Yeah.
can help us create more inclusive environments
Right.
where everyone feels valued and respected.
And that, in turn, might actually help
Exactly.
mitigate the development or the exacerbation of these
Right.
narcissistic tendencies.
That's the idea. Now, the research we discussed didn't delve into specific interventions,
Okay.
but it does point us in some promising directions.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Okay.
What kind of interventions
Right.
could potentially help break this cycle?
Well, therapy is an obvious one.
Okay.
Therapists who specialize in personality disorders
Yeah.
can help people with narcissistic traits
Yeah.
develop healthier coping mechanisms
Right.
for dealing with rejection and insecurity.
So instead of lashing out or trying to dominate others,
Right.
they can learn better ways
Yeah, more adaptive ways.
to manage their emotions
Yeah.
and build relationships.
Right. Another possibility is social skills training.
Okay.
This could help people with narcissistic tendencies
Yeah.
improve their communication and interpersonal skills,
Okay.
making them less likely to rub people the wrong way.
So like helping them understand social cues,
Exactly.
practice empathy, and build
Yeah.
genuine connections.
Exactly. Now, one thing that wasn't explored in this research
Okay.
is the role of the people
Okay.
doing the excluding the ostracizers.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
It's easy to just focus on the person
Right.
with the quote-unquote problem.
Right.
But maybe there's a role
Right.
for the rest of us to play
Yeah,
in breaking this cycle.
I think so. If we can become more aware of our own biases and judgments,
Yeah.
more mindful of how our actions
Yeah.
might contribute to someone's feelings of exclusion,
Right.
maybe we can create a more compassionate and understanding social environment.
So less quick to judge,
Yes.
more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt,
Exactly.
especially if we see someone
Right.
exhibiting those rivalry traits.
Yes, and remember, this research suggests that narcissistic traits
Yeah.
might be, at least in part,
Yeah.
a response to feeling like an outsider.
Right.
So if we can create a sense of belonging and connection,
Yeah.
that might be the most powerful intervention of all.
It's like that saying, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. Like,
Exactly.
we never really know
Right.
what someone else is going through
Yeah,
or what might have led them
right.
to develop certain personality traits.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah.
And I think it perfectly captures the spirit
Yeah.
of what we're talking about.
So in this part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
we've explored some of the real-world implications of this research,
Right.
as well as potential avenues for intervention.
Yeah.
The key takeaway here is that
Right.
understanding the link between narcissism and ostracism
Yes,
can help us create
Yeah.
more empathetic and inclusive environments.
absolutely. And in the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll tackle some lingering questions
Oh, okay.
and share a final provocative thought for you to ponder.
Okay, welcome back. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive
Yeah.
into narcissism and ostracism.
Yeah.
We've talked about how narcissists experience exclusion.
Right.
Ooh, the surprising ways that this plays out
Yeah.
in the real world, and even some ideas about how to break the cycle.
Yeah.
But as with any good deep dive, there are always more questions
Of course.
that bubble up.
That's the beauty of research, isn't it?
Yeah.
It always opens up new avenues
Yeah.
for exploration.
You know, as we were prepping for this deep dive, I
Yeah.
kept wondering about something that wasn't really addressed
Okay.
in the research.
Right.
We've talked a lot about how narcissists experience ostracism.
Right.
But what about the impact of that ostracism? Does it affect them differently
Yeah.
than it would someone who's not narcissistic?
That's a really interesting question, and unfortunately one that this particular set of studies
Yeah.
didn't directly address,
Okay.
but we can certainly speculate a bit based on what we do know.
Yeah, let's put on our speculative thinking caps.
Yeah.
What do we know?
Well, we know that ostracism in general
Mm-hmm.
can have a pretty significant negative impact
Right.
on people psychologically,
Yeah.
feelings of sadness, anger,
Yeah.
loneliness,
Right.
even a sense of being threatened.
Okay.
It can shake our sense of belonging, our self-esteem, the
Right.
feeling of control.
Yeah.
And there's even research that shows
Yeah.
that ostracism is literally experienced as pain in the brain.
Oh, wow. That makes sense, though.
Yeah.
Like we are
We're social creatures.
social creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about how narcissists often struggle
Right.
with underlying insecurity
Right.
and a fragile sense of self-worth,
Yeah.
it's plausible that the sting of ostracism could be even more intense.
So while everyone hates being let out, it might cut even deeper
Yeah.
for someone with narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah.
It almost seems cruel now
Yeah.
to think about the results of that last study.
Right.
The one that suggested that ostracism might fuel narcissism?
It's a really complex dynamic.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that narcissists often have
Yeah.
strong defense mechanisms too.
Right.
They might react to ostracism
Right.
in ways that mask their underlying vulnerability.
Okay.
So instead of showing sadness or loneliness,
Right.
they might lash out,
Right.
become more manipulative, or
Yeah.
double down on those narcissistic traits.
So it's like they're trying to protect themselves
Right.
by pushing people away
Exactly.
even further.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And it makes it that much harder to break this cycle
Right.
of ostracism and narcissism.
So if we could wave a magic wand
Yeah.
and commission a follow-up study to this research,
Okay.
what would we want to investigate?
Oh, that's a great question.
What are the big unanswered questions here?
To me, I'd love to see a study that looks at the long-term consequences of ostracism,
Okay.
specifically for people with narcissistic traits.
Okay.
Does it lead to more interpersonal problems, more conflicts at work,
Yeah.
difficulties maintaining relationships?
Okay.
Does it contribute to mental health issues like depression or anxiety?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
'Cause right now we're just speculating.
Right, we need more research.
Yeah, we need more
To
research.
really understand the impact.
And from a more practical standpoint,
Right.
it would be valuable to explore different interventions.
Absolutely.
Does therapy actually help narcissists
Yeah.
cope with ostracism more effectively?
Right. Are there specific strategies
Yeah.
that can help them build more meaningful connections
Right.
and reduce those feelings of rejection?
And what about interventions for the people doing the excluding?
Oh, that's a good point.
Can we do something to help them
Right.
become more sensitive and understanding?
I think that's crucial.
Yeah.
We tend to focus on the person with the problem,
Right.
but we need to remember that relationships are a two-way street.
Right.
Everyone has a part to play.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive,
Okay?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that
Yeah.
the relationship between narcissism and ostracism is far more complex
Absolutely.
than we might initially think.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
And it's something that affects all of us,
Right.
whether we identify as narcissistic or not.
Absolutely. We've learned that narcissists experience more ostracism,
Right.
and they may be more sensitive to it,
Yeah,
but there's still so much we don't know
right.
about how this dynamic plays out in the long term
Yeah.
and what we can do to interrupt the cycle.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over.
Okay?
We often talk about narcissism as a fixed personality trait,
Mhm.
something that's ingrained in a person.
Yeah.
But what if it's more fluid than that?
Okay.
What if in some cases it's actually a response to a social environment that's
Right.
been invalidating or rejecting?
Food for thought.
Yeah, food for thought.
And perhaps with greater understanding and compassion,
Yeah,
we can create a world where those kinds of environments are less prevalent.
well said. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We hope you found it insightful.
Yeah.
And we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration of human behavior.